Let's see. Sure.
Yeah, looks like we've got some viewers, which is good. Hello and welcome. So, in today's episode of Decred and the State of the Market, we've got with us Exus as usual, and we've also got Eduardo, who's going to be talking about his legal paper, but who's in charge of Decred, which we're really excited about. We've not done anything with legal stuff before, and Eduardo's kind of taken this route, so we're going to take this opportunity to pick his brain, see what he's been up to. So, Eduardo, give us a wave, and Exus,
Hello.
give us a wave. Fantastic. So before we get started, let's just get some questions going in the live stream. Let's be a bit active today, guys. We want to chuck as many questions as we can to Eduardo. Try and pick his brains about this stuff. But firstly, let's just make sure that you can hear us okay, and make sure you can see it okay and everything's working. Give us a thumbs up if you wouldn't mind. Okie dokie.
Yep.
So Eduardo, tell us a little bit about what you've been up to, a little bit about your background and how it's all going.
Yes. Hello, everyone. All the Decred cred heads and Decred dorks, as I've always said. I'm so happy to be back with you guys virtually, saying hello, talking to you guys. Most of you probably know who I am if you're watching this. If you don't, a little bit about myself. Oklahoma born and raised. I'm currently a 3L at the University of Oklahoma Law School. So that third year of law school. I'm in my last year. I got into Decred around 2018 after, kind of falling down the 2017 bubble, talking with some of my friends, particularly Murad, who many people in the community have probably heard of or know. And learned of Decred then, and have just kind of been a humble atom stacker ever since. I see Decred along with Bitcoin as these, digital savings vehicles, outside of the jurisdiction of government reach, which is very applicable to what we'll be talking about. Just a huge supporter of the project, and started a podcast that eventually turned into me putting up a contract for Decred in depth. I did that for about a year and did not renew my contract. I know we'll get to talk about all that stuff. But yeah, just so excited. Never really left the community. I'd like to just go ahead and start off by saying I have never sold a single atom that I've purchased, or that was ever donated to me, or that I earned from the DAO. I truly see Decred as a store of value and a savings vehicle, and something that, 10, 15 years from now, it's going to look extremely obvious, and I'm going to have something I'm going to be able to give to my son and my hopefully son one day. And yeah, so that was a lot, but that's me.
No, the community, and I said this before the show, but the community's like, wow, where's Eduardo? Where's Decred in depth? And everyone's been going crazy about that. But we'll get onto that in a moment. But I did have one of the most important questions, and that is, how is Little Man?
Yes. Thank you for asking. Little man is doing tremendously well. He's happy. He's healthy, and so he's 2 years old now. He's starting to tell me no and try to have his way, and but he's healthy and happy, and that's all I can really ask for. I wish I had him here, but I obviously knew I was doing this, so he's with Granny and Abuelo right now, and that's going to allow me not to. He'd be jumping all around and hi, yeah, that's what he'd be doing. So.
Oh, no, it's wonderful little man, and they really are brilliant.
I kind of want to just, because obviously the three of us, we all know each other, and the Decred dad movement is something that's very real, and I obviously we're all here for the long-term vision, but I do think that whenever people have families, wives, children, people that they care about, people that are dependent on them, and they're still involved in a community like Decred, oftentimes I think crypto is seen as like a young man's game, which I guess it kind of is,
Yeah.
or just like this radical new technology, or people who maybe they're degenerate gamblers and things like this. But what I appreciate about the Decred community, besides just like how extremely intelligent and thoughtful and intellectually honest people are, is a lot of people have skin in the future. It's
Yeah.
not like a 100x leverage trading type of group. These are people who are being extremely thoughtful. I mean, me myself, I've never had a high paying job. I've always had kind of menial jobs, and I have chosen to use that hard earned money to put it into this, digital sovereign money. And I think that um, it lends some more credibility to the project, I think.
Yeah. When we talked all them years ago, back in, I think that was for Decred in Depth actually, and we talked about then. Actually, one of my biggest missions was kind of pensions and looking at making sure, generational wealth and make sure my kids and my grandkids have got something. The funny thing about Decred Dad, that's what Decred Dad, that's what they call me. My kids, Decred Dad, or maybe it was something else. I think it was actually ruder than that. They're teenagers now, but my eldest, he does a little YouTube channel, and I said, you know what, we should get together. We should offer, his gaming channel he does. We should offer some Decred rewards for people that want to come on and do some racing. So we might do that in the next few weeks. I think that might be a bit of fun. So, but yeah, no, the
Okay.
Decred Dad move is absolutely a thing, and the fact that everyone is actually thinking, and especially, I mean, I don't know if you guys have heard what's happening here in the UK with all the kind of money printing and all the kind of devaluation of the pound, but people are starting to wake up to the fact, oh, this is actually a real thing. We're 12 years in from when Bitcoin, 13 years from when Bitcoin started. This is actually playing out, and maybe for us non-gamblers, it could be a good hedge. On to my next question. So last time we spoke, you were actually starting a new career. You were starting to move into doing your law degree. So one of the things I'd like to know is, what was the catalyst for choosing to study law? What category of law are you kind of following, and where do you hope it to lead to?
Thank you. I love that question. That's a great question. And it actually kind of brings me back to that 2017, 2018 era. Um, I fell down the crypto rabbit hole, right? And I remember a conversation I had with Murad one day, and I was trying to kind of get my life back in order. At this time, I was like 24, 25. I'd made some big academic mistakes that had like kind of derailed my academic career. And I was talking with him, and I was like, well, I feel like I really want to, be a lawyer, like a crypto lawyer. I think that would be the coolest thing. And he was like, well, that's a huge waste of time. He thought that, he's like, law is going to be completely irrelevant the way we're headed. He's like, you should just learn how to program. And, I think that's the best thing to do. And he's right, at least in terms of, programming be a great career and, kind of where things are headed. But I couldn't just shake the desire to study law. And it does kind of go back to almost like a childish, I guess, kind of origin. Looking up to President Obama in 2008, I just thought lawyers were the coolest thing. And then fast forward to me having to try to get into law school, I was at a point where I simply was trying to just live up to my potential, really, is what it was. And I felt like this was a way that I could do that. It was the path that I had set down. And although I got derailed from that path, I felt like I had to get back up. And so as I went into law school, I was going, so bright eyed, bushy tailed, and this kind of like tech guy who has his YouTube channel and, was always talking about Bitcoin and crypto, even to all my classmates. They all know me as like the Bitcoin guy, right? Um, and as you're going through law school classes, like just thinking about, jurisdiction and secured transactions and these different things, and having Decred and Bitcoin in the back of my head, just always kind of thinking like, man, some of this stuff doesn't comport with the future that I envision. And so I came in thinking, well, when I graduate, I'm going to be a crypto attorney. Maybe I'll do a little bit of esports. And that was kind of my thought. As I went through law school, I realized, one, that probably starting a firm right after graduation for me was not going to be a smart idea. That was what I thought I was going to do. Because the practice of law is so much different than the schooling of law. But I always knew I wanted to be in the courtroom. So currently I work for the Oklahoma Indigent Defense System, which is a state agency, which is something we'll get to as we talk about my paper, just agencies in general and the fourth branch of government. But we provide criminal defense for those who get court-appointed attorneys in Oklahoma. There's 77 counties. 2 of those counties, Oklahoma County and Tulsa County, have their own public defender's office, but the Oklahoma Indigent Defense System oversees the other 75 counties. And so I'm what's known as a legal research assistant right now. And when I graduate, I expect that I'll continue on that path. But while I've been in law school, I have actually taken very few criminal law courses. I came in, very much wanting to take things like securities law and tax law and I guess more transactional work, as they would call it. But I always knew that I would not be happy unless I was in the courtroom. So I've done a lot of experiential classes that have given me that opportunity to, mock trial, moot court, negotiations teams, but have pushed myself to take what I guess people would consider some of the more difficult law classes: administrative law, federal securities regulation, income tax. But these other areas of law that are more corporate, more civil, and I expect that one day after I've sort of learned the ropes of litigation and feel more secure in myself as an attorney, we'll probably try to go back to my dream, which is starting my own firm.
Yeah, I think it's actually a noble thing, and I liked your initial point about going either into software or going into law, and I think I read a book by Laura. I always get her name wrong. Laura Shen, I think her name is, The Cryptopians, and that really highlights a lot of the legal aspects of what Ethereum went through, and we'll talk a little bit about the Howey kind of tests a bit later. But in actual fact, you start to realize, actual fact, it underpins everything, and that's so obvious now when you think about it.
Well, and
So,
I'd like to interject there too,
yeah,
because someone who's well known in just the digital asset space in general. Oh my gosh, what is his name? A lot of people think he's Satoshi Nakamoto, and his name is escaping me. But he has a law
not
degree.
Mr. Wright,
No, not
Gavin.
him, not
No,
the right guy.
yeah,
That's the one that he claims he's Satoshi Nakamoto. This
yeah,
guy has
okay.
his blog like unenumerated. His name will come to me in a second. But anyways, that was a unworthy tangent because I can't even remember. But he's kind of one of these just really high level
Oh, it's here.
consensus protocol developers. And
Adam Back apparently.
I'm sorry.
Adam Back apparently. Is
No,
that it?
not Adam.
No, because he's Blockstream, isn't he? Yeah. Sorry.
Unenumerated blog.
Yeah, I was reading the
Nick
stream as he was
Szabo.
coming through that. Nick Szabo.
Nick Szabo.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of his name.
Yeah, he wrote some like really influential pieces back in the day, and he has his blog Unenumerated, and I highly recommend people check out. And I'll share it with you in the private chat. His blog,
Yeah,
but a
I'll
lot of his
post it as well.
writings. But he's a developer by training. Like that was I want to say he even has a PhD, and we're talking like the hard languages, C and such. And so he has this tremendous career in programming, and then goes to law school and never practices. But he goes in my thought, I imagine that he went because he understood that essentially, like, law is not a bad thing, and I'm like kind of one of these people, and I think a lot of crypto people have like an intuitive, like anti-state type of bend to them. But obviously everyone wants law and order. We all want to live in safe households, safe communities. We want our kids to go to good schools. So taxes, all these things are necessary evils, if you will. But as technology moves forward, that legal underpinning, and I'm not talking about like the bull crap of agency law and the CFTC going after developers or going after DAOs, and really what I see as like power grabs. I'm thinking like, how do we really want? Because essentially, what's happening is we're creating law in cyberspace. That's how I see it. Smart contracts, money being kind of the founding like foundation of a nation, of a state, right? Is these like collective delusions and um, so you start with money, but everything that gets built on top of it, whether that be the DAO, these sub DAOs, smart contracts, and the transfer of digital value, and as we start to link these things more and more into the real world, real assets, deeds, titles, these things can all be on the blockchain. I mean, Decred has been being used in Brazilian elections.
Yeah.
So the point that I'm trying to make is that law and technology, they need to like kind of grow together, and I'm not talking about man-made law. I'm talking about, as we're building these things, what type of world do we want to build? Like when the founding fathers came to America and they wrote that constitution, they had to envision, well, what type of world do we want to live in? And I think that that's not necessarily a legal thing, it could just be very philosophical and high level kind of thinking, right? But it's something that as we build this future, or these are the questions we have to ask ourselves.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Actually, the rules that we want to live under, and once again, I think we talked about this in the Decred in Depth thing, where I think we called it rules without rulers, where you kind of have you have your law, but because it's so fixed in, there's no kind of ambiguity, and I think that's what a lot of people are looking at right now. When you see all this money printing and you see all this kind of blatant manipulation and this blatant fraudery. In the actual fact, that's not the world that productive people want to live in. That's no good for productive people. Exodus, we've talked loads. Is there anything you want to interject with?
No, you guys are the experts. Eduardo,
No.
words of wisdom. It's been exciting to listen though. I've
Yeah,
just been
nice.
looking through the chat here. Lots of no questions just yet, but
Yeah, get your questions in,
yeah.
guys. Should we just move on just a little bit onto your the first part of your paper? So your paper examines the Responsible Financial Innovation Act, the RFIA, and how it applies in context to Decred. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind just describing the act and highlight some of the important impacts that it's likely to have on Decred and the wider crypto space.
So the RFIA was proposed piece of legislation by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and something Loomis. I can't remember her first name, but the thought, I believe, whenever they proposed the legislation, was that they could create a framework that would bring cryptocurrency into the already existing framework that existed. Um, and the method of achieving this was essentially separating the digital assets themselves from the security contracts that a lot of groups and teams were using to sort of build these assets and build these protocols. And I think that the intention was extremely good, and like just the fact that this was introduced by two senators, um, two very respectable senators. One's from New York, which is the financial hub, if you will, has a lot of stakeholders and within her jurisdiction and within her populace, if you will. Um, it's all very good, but what I believe is missing from the bill is like almost a fundamental understanding of how these like protocols work. Um, and I describe it in the beginning of the paper as trying to stick a square peg into a round hole. But what they do in the act, it's extremely interesting. Um, and actually, I'd like to kind of start, and I'll answer your question. I won't forget, but I'd like to start by explaining like kind of the motivation behind this paper and what I was trying to do and how it all came to be. Um, Obviously, I came into law school, and the first day I ever streamed Staked Podcast was my first day of class. And so Decred had clearly been in my mind all throughout, the last 2 years. And you have to do a writing requirement to graduate. Has to be about 20 to 40 pages, depending on the topic, depending on the professor. And there's a lot of boring things in law, and I just was like, I want this to be interesting to me if I'm going to have to spend a lot of time on it. So obviously I need this to be about Decred. And I knew that as a legal practitioner, there's almost like two things that you have to do, depending on the situation. Either you're being an advocate, or you're offering objective analysis, right? And what's the difference here? An advocate is someone who's going, and I don't care if my client's right or wrong. Like, I'm advocating for him, and I'm not trying to give you the right answer. I'm not trying to give you all the information. I'm fighting for someone. And the other side of this is someone comes to you and they say, hey, what do I need to do? I have a tax problem. What do I do? Or I want to raise money. How do I do this and I stay compliant? And this is where it's your job is to kind of be like more objective. You have to look at the facts, you have to look at the law, and you have to apply the facts to the law. So I came in and I was like, all right, I want to write about Decred. And I at first was like very high-minded about this, was thinking like the paper, and I still think there's so much research that needs to be done in just the area of decentralized autonomous organizations and decentralized organizations. And hopefully as we get into the Ooki DAO suit later on, I can kind of tie into what I'm saying right now. But so I looked at the RFIA, which was, recently proposed piece of legislation. And I said, okay, I am going to just objectively analyze Decred, objectively analyze this this proposed statute, and then see how I think things fall out. How does the cookie crumble, if you will? And as I did that, what I found was just a lot of contradictions, and a lot of contradictions within the statute itself in terms of how they were trying to define these new assets, who they were trying to give jurisdiction to. And should I just keep going? Because I kind of have forgotten your question.
That's absolutely fine. So the question is just to highlight some of the aspects of the Responsible Financial Innovations Act, and just how it's likely to impact on Decred and cryptocurrencies. So no, you're
Yes.
right on par, actually.
Okay. Yes. So that's a great segue. So the main thing, like I said in the beginning, is the separation of the assets itself from the securities used to issue the assets. And so in the broad crypto community, what I would say this legislation does is it creates a path forward for teams who are trying to build things today and tomorrow. I now know that if I fall within these explicit guidelines, I can raise money, and I still have to comply with the rules of the SEC, but I can now issue this digital asset, and I don't have to worry about, am I going to get sued that this is a security? Am I going to get sued, for not having give proper disclosures? Because the framework is that this new asset that I'm issuing will be considered an ancillary asset until it reaches a certain threshold of decentralization, at which point it is automatically considered a commodity, right? And the other part of this is, what is the impact on Decred? Oh, actually, no. One more point is, it also creates a very interesting framework for taxation, which I did not talk about in the paper, but I actually thought was like extremely progressive. And I actually think that the taxation part of the bill is the best part, because so if you stake, any rewards from staking would not be considered gross income until disposed of. So until you sell it, that's extremely helpful, right? Because obviously if you're like staking Decred, like, yes, you're like getting something throughout the year for doing that, right? But most of us are wanting to hold it for a prolonged period of time. Like, we're not using it right away. So taxing me on that income could be burdensome for some people, or, just like, and I think it'll be easy for accounting too, because I think people will be able to keep track of their rewards once they're actually selling them for something else, as opposed to keeping track of my rewards every time a ticket votes. And, oh, okay, now I have another $25 of income that I'll have to report to the government. And so, but what it also does in the tax portion of the proposed bill is introduces the idea of a decentralized autonomous organization. And it defines a decentralized autonomous organization extremely broad. And we can talk about that in a minute. But what it does, most importantly, is it says that all DAOs will be considered disregarded, will not be considered disregarded entities for taxation purposes. So essentially, that means it creates like pass-through taxation if you are a member of a DAO. And I think that pass-through taxation is like, let's say me and you, Phoenix, we enter into a partnership, right? And we're selling real estate, and whatever money we make that the business makes, 50% of it is your income for that year, 50% of it is my income from that year, regardless of what we do with it, regardless if we reinvested it, regardless if we, well, actually, that's not technically true. But the point is that's how it works, versus corporate taxation, which is the corporation receives money, it pays a certain percentage, but you as a shareholder of the corporation won't get taxed until there's a dividend payout, right? Because so it kind of gets taxed twice. But yeah, so I thought that the tax portion of the bill was very good. And so those are some of the effects on Decred in the broader market.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's actually the tax side of the DAO that really interests me. This isn't a question on my sheet, so hopefully it doesn't go too off topic. But it's something I'm going through at the moment, because obviously some of I try to keep in at least 60% of every month's earnings, but some just has to pay for bills. And something I'm trying to work out now is the actual fact what part of that is taxable. So the way I understand it for a DAO is that there is no tax obligation until the individual actually takes it out as actually a fiat pricing point or whatever. And it becomes interesting to think that you could actually be taxed on that whilst it's still Decred, like your stakes. I know obviously you've just said that that's not the case, but it does become interesting that if there was a way of them finding you, obviously, and there's a lot of stakeholders, and they were able to tax you whilst you were still trying to hold tickets, that would be quite detrimental to what you're trying to achieve for future wealth. So yeah, I find that quite interesting. Is there any thoughts on that, or is it kind of, should we move on? Nice. It's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Exodus, you say something?
Sorry.
No, I was going to say we can move on from my end.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have anything to add.
That's
I don't
right.
think I do, but one thing that is interesting about what you said is the distinction between the ticket holder and the non-ticket holder. I think there becomes some like very interesting consequences in terms of who's considered part of the DAO, right? Because anyone can go comment in the forum on Politeia. Anyone's able to participate in that aspect of the governance. And then there kind of becomes an interesting conversation about who's allowed to be a stakeholder, just because of there is a lack of ticket splitting at this time. But assume that we get that solved, right? Then it's like, okay, anyone who holds Decred, who decides that they want to stake and buy a little bit of a ticket and proceed in that way, then it's like everyone who holds Decred is actually a stakeholder at that point. So if in an ideal world where Decred's extremely successful, that's millions and millions of people with just small amounts of Decred earning interest on that Decred, who are now as equally as much part of the DAO as someone who holds a whole ticket. But other than that, I don't think I have too much to add.
Yeah, it does get quite complex, and I must admit, just going through it myself right now is, I mean, I've still got until April before I have to declare, but it's quite a minefield actually. The next one, which I think will quite interest the community, and I think this is probably the one part that I was really interested in, is the RFIA intends imposing disclosure obligations on cryptocurrencies that raise funds through sales of digital assets. Now, how do you see this playing out in the future? Because obviously we've heard of like people having ticket sales and all the rest of it. Especially in the Ethereum space, it's raised millions and billions of pounds. Do you see this changing in the future, or do you think that this will be more of the same in the future? How do you think projects are going to raise money going forward?
I think that expect to see more of the same. Regulators are going to try to regulate, and there's a huge conversation to be had about the incentives behind, the SEC and the CFTC and some of the decisions that they've recently they've made. But I think broadly speaking, that it actually is good for innovation. I think that some clarity in the United States will help at least institutions start moving into this space, because the talent and the manpower and crypto doesn't have to do anything to continue to grow, because the young people, this is where they want to be. The brains, that this is where they're headed. But if we don't get money behind some of these projects, we don't get some clarity in terms of regulation. But that's like the status in me talking. Another piece of me also thinks like a lot of these, like, it doesn't matter, which is like a crazy thing to actually say on a stream, right? Because the United States can continue to pass as many laws as they want. But what I think we're actually seeing play out in real time is we're going to test decentralization. And what I mean by that is it's only at the moment where someone can stand in front of a congressional committee and say, I can't change the protocol. I can't do anything that you're asking me to do. That's where things get like really, really interesting. And that's part of the reason why I'm so bullish on Decred, because I think a lot of the answers with Decred is I can't, and I can't tell you who's a ticket holder and who's not. I could tell you if I did, and actually I do want to publicly put this out there, just because like as a practicing, first of all, I'm a law student. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know anything. If you have real legal issues, hire a lawyer. But the other part of that is I'm actually not a stakeholder. I own enough Decred where at different points I could have been a stakeholder. Obviously it's fluctuating in price, right? It's going up right now. But I've never staked. And that's been purposefully done. And it's actually been proven to be a smart decision, given how the CFTC is trying to do their regulation by enforcement. And I'd like to get on my soap opera, because when I came to law school, I knew nothing of agency law. And, it was actually someone on Twitter who said, you need to take admin law. And so I was like, all right, I trust this random person who follows me on Twitter. I'm going to take admin law. And as I've been diving more into my legal education, what I've realized is that administrative law is like arguably the most important branch of government. And my professor calls it the fourth branch of government. And it's actually like extremely like insidious and like extremely anti-democratic in a lot of cases, and like also just sometimes like downright just perverted, I'd say, in terms of the relationship between these agencies, which this is how they work, right? So Congress can pass a statute, and they say, we want to save the environment, right? And we are going to create a sub branch of our congressionally authoritative power to create rules and legislation. We're taking some of that power and we're moving it over to this agency, call it the EPA. And the EPA is not only going to be able to pass rules and regulations that have the force of statute, they're also going to be able to sue people for violations. They're also going to be able to adjudicate those claims. They're also going to be able to. So essentially what happens, these agencies, they have legislative power, they have executive power, they have judicial power, and a lot of time they have very little oversight too. At least like they're not directly held. They're not directly held to the voters, at least, right? And so let's talk about the SEC. That one's the most relevant for this, for our purposes. There's, I think, 5 commissioners. They're appointed by the president every 5 years, and they serve 4 or 5 year terms, something like that. And so you start getting to party politics, right? If Trump elects a commissioner, and now we elect, Biden elects a different commissioner, they start feeling affiliated to their parties. But then there's also, and Murad talked about this once in a podcast that I watched, and I think it's very true, which is like, governments are not like one cohesive whole. They're often like these fractured entities with what is clearly playing out in crypto, I guess, kind of like opposing missions or goals, if you will, and also just like incentives. So if I'm the commissioner of the SEC, my incentive is to do a really good job, be seen as, a great regulator, so that I can, whenever my term is done, get a great job in private practice, making millions and millions of dollars. So how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to pass rules that are extremely intricate, or that only I will be able to, assist companies in moving through these rules and regulations, so that once I'm outside of government work, now I've created almost like a very like lucrative business for myself, because I know the ins and outs of the SEC. But then you also get these like power grabs, right? Because these are just humans who have egos and who, have, desire for power or whatever it is. They're in politics. A lot of them, at least at the SEC and CFTC, are lawyers. So we all know the stereotype that some of them have. And so then you get, well, if I'm over at the CFTC, oh yeah, Gary Gensler, he's been talking about all of these projects are their securities. Well, if that's true, that's going to dwindle on my power. And so I want to be the one who's in charge of this new budding industry, because then I'm going to secure the future of, my future career once I'm out of government work, my family, my kids, because I had all this. Because the regulatory capture is extremely perverted as well. In like, the agencies are very weakly aligned. Like the incentives are extremely weakly aligned. And I've been, as I was driving this, coming back home after dropping off Lalo, I was thinking like, that's not the case with Decred. Like the incentives are extremely aligned. And, there's been talks about like sub DAOs. And even at a sub DAO level, right? With Decred, we know there's only 21 million coins. We know, the issuance schedule. There's a lot of certainty in areas, and the main objective of everyone who's involved in the project is like essentially spread the good word. I want more people to use it, so that like the incentive only works one way, versus with these agencies, the incentives work in many different ways. And I'd like to go start talking about just kind of this idea of regulation by enforcement. Actually, do you have a question? Because I'll defer.
I just want to pause just for
Yeah.
2 seconds, because my mind feels blown. my mind is like, no, I'm going to have to watch this about 3 times now. Then I'm going to have to get you back on just to explain it again. But wow, it seems like you've come a long way in 2 years, man.
Well, and the crazy thing is I know how much I don't know. Like I still don't know so much.
It's amazing, man. It's amazing. What you've just said is just, God, just trying to absorb it all in. Exus, is there any questions coming through that you want to talk about?
Yes, we do have some questions. First one is from Shangjun Sun. He asks, would the Decred DAO pass Wyoming state license requirements? I don't know if you're aware of that. I know you're in Oklahoma.
So this is a very interesting question, actually. I'm glad you asked it. Thank you, Sung Jun Sun, because in theory, the answer is yes, right? Like I actually thought about this because in the RFIA, DAOs are statutorily defined as being properly registered under a state or equivalent jurisdiction, right? So according to if the RFIA is to become law, then according to the IRS, you would not be considered a DAO unless you are registered. Well, I think that this just is like a misunderstanding of how this is working, because it's like the DAOs exist regardless of your law, like it's there. People are using these forums. And I guess then the argument becomes, all right, well, you're just breaking the law. You're doing something that you need to register. It's like, okay, let's play that out. So who is going to register, who's going to register amongst the three of us? Well, I feel like I don't have the authority to do that. I'm sure that both of you probably feel the same way. But let's say, as a outspoken member of the Decred community and, soon to be attorney one day, fingers crossed, for some reason, I get a knock on my door and the state of Oklahoma says, Eduardo, we know you're involved in Decred. We know you're a stakeholder. I'm not. And you now have to register. You have to register Decred as a DAO in the state of Oklahoma. And I'll say, okay, I'll do that. And I fill out your paperwork because I don't want to go to jail. But the point is that it has no force on the actual operation of the DAO. And this is the part I think regulators, it's not that they don't understand it. I think they really are like trying to deny it. And we're seeing this play out with the Ooki DAO in real time. And it's actually hilarious in my opinion, because so people who don't know, the Ooki DAO, to answer your question though, the exact question is like, yes, in theory, it shouldn't be difficult. It's just filling out paperwork. Anyone could do it. It doesn't mean that it like has any practical meaning though, in terms of how Decred's going to operate or anything of that nature. And so where's I going with this? Okay, yeah. So the CFTC, right? So the SEC, they come out, led by Gary Gensler, and they're like, that's a security. That's a security. That's a security. Ripple's a security. They see everything through the lines of this is a security. And they may be correct under the Howey test, which maybe we can get into in a bit. But what happens on the CFTC side of things, right? The CFTC has traditionally been seen as like the more friendly regulator towards crypto. And also it's of note too, that like the Securities Exchange Commission was created in early 1930s, as a response to the 1929 Great Depression. And I guess some of the unscrupulous behavior that was taking place at that time in terms of how people were raising money for joint stock corporations, right? And so Congress said, look, this is getting out of hand. People are raising money without the promise of any future delivery or the ability to actually do anything. And so we need to create an agency. It'll be charged with making sure investors have all the right information so that people aren't like having fraud committed against them. And I think that's like extremely analogous to like what's happening like right now in the crypto space. Like everyone's like, oh, there's these frauds and these ICOs and these NFT raising mechanisms. And the NFT boom was essentially the ICO all over again, right? People raising money through the sale of these assets, with the expectation of profits. And, a lot of times they were not going to be able to deliver no matter what. And so I think the actual solution to all of this, and this is staying within the status mindset, I think it's the creation of a new agency. I think that it's trying to stick a square peg through a round hole. You're trying to have these assets like fit a framework from 1933 and 1934, or in the case of the CFTC, 1979, but even so, the history even goes back even further than that. The 1979, I think, is when the CFTC was created, but they were spawned out of another agency that goes back to, I think, like 1934. So still a very long time ago. And so SEC is saying everything's a security. The commodity commissioners, they file suit in California against Ooki DAO. But they did this after already making a settlement agreement with the kind of the builders, I believe. So the facts here may be a little wrong, but the point is correct, right? So they initially went after the builders of this protocol that was called like DZ0 or something like that. And they said, hey, you guys, you're trying to build an exchange, and that exchange is going to facilitate the trading of these assets. And you've done all that and you haven't registered, so you're breaking the law and you need to stop. And the builder said, okay, fine, we'll stop. They settled for $250,000. And then what they did was they took, I don't know exactly the technicals of how this worked, but I mean, we all understand these things enough to kind of understand that they went and took control of, I guess, what would be like the keys of the DAO, and gave control to this community, right? They gave control, they put it in a DAO, they tied it to a token. People could vote their token. They could affect, how the treasury is being used, right? So they said, okay, we don't have control of it anymore. We're it's code now. So we actually can't, you can't do anything to us because we can't do anything about it. And the CFTC said, okay, well, we're going to sue the whole DAO then, right? So they file against the DAO, and this is important. They call it an unincorporated association, and they say that you're breaking, federal law. And this designation of unincorporated association is really important because, one, it dictates how you can be sued, who you can sue, how you can sue them. So it's called like jurisdiction and venue. Jurisdiction would be the state of Oklahoma. I'm in the county of Cleveland within the state of Oklahoma. Venue would be, let me rephrase that. Jurisdiction would be, I'm in Oklahoma. Venue would be, am I suing in Oklahoma County, or am I suing in Cleveland County? Or am I going to, Garfield County? These are all different venues, but the state will have jurisdiction. And actually, even like a county has to have jurisdiction too sometimes, like in family law disputes and such. Oklahoma County can't exert jurisdiction over a kid that was born in Cleveland County, right? So these things are extremely important. And with unincorporated associations, venue is proper where personal jurisdiction exists for any member of the unincorporated association. So in theory, going back to the Ooki DAO case, if the CFTC knows or has reason to believe that any member of the DAO lives in San Francisco, then San Francisco is the correct place for this suit to be had, for this case to, continue on. And one thing that was very interesting in the complaint was they differentiate between token holders who voted their tokens and token holders who did not vote their tokens. Hence my disclosure earlier in the stream. And essentially what they're saying is that everyone who voted their tokens is actually jointly and severally liable for the actions of the DAO. And what that means is that they could go after just one person and go after all of his assets, or they could go after, a collection of them and go after and make them divvy up the damages, if you will. It's actually really scary because if I'm if I'm a software developer who's trying to just build cool tech, right? Like that's my job. That's what I was born to do, is build new things. I've essentially gone and been introduced into an environment where if the CFTC comes after you and I'm held responsible, they're coming after everything I have. And on top of that, like I'm not going to really be able, probably I'm not going to be extremely well equipped to even like be able to afford a good lawsuit against an army of attorneys. And so it really is quite scary for software developers what's happening. And it's like it's considered like regulation through enforcement is what they call it. And so this kind of gets us back to like the Ripple lawsuit in a weird way, because in the Ripple lawsuit, Ripple, one of their defenses in their motion to dismiss was essentially like, we haven't had proper notice of us of breaking any laws. You can't throw us from, like, that would go against due process, right? I can't break a law if I don't know it exists or if it doesn't exist on the books. And so that was kind of one of the defenses that Ripple Labs threw out there, and the judge did not completely throw it out. So that is promising. And that was just a long rant. So I think that some of that was probably interesting.
Yeah, no, it was quite interesting, the Ooki thing about going after token holders and non-token holders, because you can, that when they test this stuff and they test to see what they can do, it's going after the weakest entity, I suppose. And that's really interesting. And even if you think you're the most decentralized thing in the world, if there's a weak chain, they'll come after that first and see how far they can dig. I remember reading something, I think it was by who's the guy that he put a proposal on for Decred? His blog's really cool, but he was basically saying the reason that employment tax exists is because it's so easy to get. A lot of the corporate tax and things like that are so much harder to get the hands on, because
Dominic Frisby, maybe.
Dominic Frisby, yeah. Yeah, no, and he was that was in his tax book. Actually, it's really good if you haven't read it. But he's basically saying that's the reason that governments have gone after that, because they can literally take it out of your account or out of your paycheck before you even see your paycheck. And governments tend to go for the easy targets first. I mean, I thought that was quite.
And it also kind of shows in like the strategy of these agencies in terms of like regulation by enforcement. I'm sure you guys have heard of the lawsuit of like one of the early Coinbase employees, and they're trying to get him for insider trading. Oh, was it OpenSea? I think maybe even both.
Really?
Oh yeah, so it was OpenSea, right? So it was an OpenSea, and he was an employee at OpenSea, and he would know which NFTs were being posted on the homepage before they were posted on the homepage. And he would somehow, so it's alleged, he would buy the NFTs and before they were on the homepage, and then once they were on the homepage, he'd sell them. And so that would be, if NFTs are considered securities, then that would be considered, insider trading. But you have to prove that NFTs are actually securities, right? So it's like what the SEC is very smart. Like, these are extremely intelligent lawyers. They know what they're doing. And what they're basically doing is they're trying to, so if the only issue in this case is an NFT a security, every other fact of this case would be, if the NFT is a security, then it would absolutely be a conviction. Then what I can do is I can go and create law through lawsuits, right? Because now I'm just arguing in front of a judge that this NFT is actually a security. And this is probably a great transition into me really kind of diving into the paper and, sort of the RFIA and the problems as it relates to Decred, in my opinion, which is, it's almost like circular logic and circular reasoning. Because so the RFIA is broken down, in my view, primarily into like 3-4 sections that really matter. The first section is the money and finance section of the United States Code. And this is a broad title. And the purpose of it is to just create definitions, general things. This is money and finance. I might be over in SEC land, but I might need to reference money and finance. Or I might be over here in EPA land, but I still need to reference the money and finance, right? So they, in the money and finance section, they define a couple different things. One of them being a virtual currency. And they say a virtual currency is anything that has any of those properties we always talk about with Bitcoin: unit of account, store of value, medium of exchange. And they also include some other things. It's not backed by any other sort of legal tender. It's not backed by, interestingly, I believe it can be backed by another digital asset and still be considered a virtual currency, if my memory serves me correctly. But and then they also say, okay, there's these things called digital assets. It's still in the money and finance section. They say a digital asset, it can be a security, it could be a commodity, but it's, you know, largely they're assets that are used by these ledgers, the ledger technology, right? And so then they go over to the Securities Exchange Act. So we're in a different pillar now, and they say, okay, for purposes of the Securities Exchange Act, we're going to create this new thing called an ancillary asset. And an ancillary asset is any assets that's issued in connection with a section 41, maybe section 21 security offering, right?
Section 41B4.
Thank you. Section 41B4 security offering. And so then the question becomes, okay, well, what's a section 41B4 security offering? Well, fortunately enough, the Supreme Court has, well, actually, we can go to the statute, right, and look up what's the definition of a security. And amongst those things is something called an investment contract. If you read the definition of security, I don't remember off the top of my head, but nothing in the list of things that is enumerated looks similar to Decred, right? So the only hope is this investment contract analysis. And this is the thing that everyone's been talking about over crypto Twitter for probably the last 5 years, right? The Howey test. And the Howey test is the expectation, a raising of money, the expectation of profit at the... Sorry, I'm trying to do this from memory, but clearly not a great memory. Expectation of profit at the hands of someone, the control under the... I'm just actually going to click on the paper.
Yeah, it's why you do that is that the Howey one is something that comes up so much, and that was going to be my next question actually. So yeah, it's because I think there's 4 points, isn't there, that has to pass?
It's 4 or 3 depending on how you like who you ask. I like to do 4 because I think it's... So there it is. Okay, an investment of money in a common enterprise. And this third one, with the expectation of profit derived from the effort of others. Sometimes the 3 and 4 kind of get grouped together, but I think it's easier to separate them for like purposes of analysis. So an ancillary asset has to be in connection with the security offering, right? For it to be an ancillary asset. Well, you go through this, this analysis of investment contract, and you find that like largely fails for Decred, right? There was not really an investment of money. Well, and when I did this analysis, I tried to be more rigorous. I really tried to break it into like sort of like the origin of Decred, and I broke it into people who received the airdrop, people who began mining, and people who purchased mining machines. And as you go through the analysis, what I hope I've shown is that each of these groups of people kind of like fails for one reason or another. Either there was no investment of money, or maybe there's not an expectation of profit, or maybe that expectation is not derived from the efforts of others because I'm a miner and I'm contributing, right? So for one reason or another, all groups of Decred investors fail. And so then it's like, all right, Decred's not an ancillary asset. So now we go over to the third pillar, which is the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. And I'm going to pull up a little picture that I've made just to make sure I'm commodities. Yes. Okay. So in this third pillar for the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, they say that First of all, they redefine commodity to include digital assets. And they say that the digital asset has to be in accordance with. Hold on. I want to take one step back because I forgot this, and this is very important. And it comes back up. Back to pillar 2 in the securities. Ancillary assets also cannot have one of the 5 properties, as I've called them, right? So for something to be considered an ancillary asset, it cannot have one of these 5 properties. And the 5 properties, I don't remember them off the top of my head either, but essentially they're properties associated with a business entity, quote unquote. So they're like the 5 rights, as I believe I call them. Command F. I'm not going to be able to find them in the photo very easily. But
it'd be great to get a copy of your pillars of identifying this stuff as well. I'll put it on the post if you have.
Okay.
One.
Yes.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So they basically say that there's these. If an asset gives you any of these 5 rights in a business entity, then it cannot be considered an ancillary asset. And the question that I have there in the analysis was, well, is Decred a business entity? And so then we have to look to the 4th pillar, which is the taxation, right? So now we're back over in taxation land. We're skipping over commodities land, but we're over in taxation land. And in the taxation land, they try to define decentralized autonomous organizations as business entities. But we already discussed earlier in this podcast that they also define decentralized autonomous organizations as DAOs that are properly incorporated in a state or similar jurisdiction. So now it's like, all right, Decred's a DAO. I've been calling it a DAO. I think it's a DAO. I think it's the best example of a DAO. And, the other legal scholars agree with that, not just myself. And I'll talk about that in a second. But the decentralized autonomous organization, if not registered by someone, is not a DAO, and Decred's not registered. And I guess I could go register, or maybe, one of you two should register or something of this nature. But it doesn't mean anything really. It's kind of just like a pointless, frivolous thing, and it has no actual bearing on Decred. But let's just assume Decred is a DAO and assume that it is a business entity, right? So these 5 properties, arguably Decred gives one of these 5 properties, right? And I wish I could just find them in this paper. Hold on.
Exodus, I don't know if you remember this, or if I'm just kind of making this up, but was before the DAO went decentralized, was there a register for it? Did Jake register it? Do you remember?
It was an LLC.
An LLC?
Yes,
Yeah, I thought
it was an LLC.
Yeah, so I thought I remember reading
maybe
somewhere.
We do qualify then.
Yeah, that it had gone through the process, and this was whilst it was, while Jake was holding the keys, or while Company Zero were holding the keys, I believe. So yeah.
So the 5 rights, what is a debt or equity interest, liquidation rights, entitlement to interest or dividend payments, a profit or revenue share from that entity solely from the entrepreneurial or managerial efforts of others. And this 5th one, I call it the catch-all, any other financial interest in a business entity. And so essentially, I think that we'd be able to find that Decred does have one of those 5, like one of those 5 properties in a business entity. So that would already mean it's not an ancillary asset. And so now let's move back over to pillar 3. And I know this has been not very confusing. I mean, this has been extremely confusing. They say that a commodity is a digital asset. And they say, as long as it doesn't have one of those 5 properties that I just talked about. But we already discussed, we think that Decred possibly has one of those 5 assets. And so they say the CFTC will have jurisdiction over all digital assets. So that is digital assets that don't have one of those 5 properties. And they'll also have jurisdiction over ancillary assets that follow the rules of Section 41B4, as we discussed earlier. And So I'm looking at all of this and I'm saying, okay, Decred is a virtual currency. A digital asset includes virtual currencies in its definition in the money and finance section. Decred's not an ancillary asset for multitude of reasons. And at least within the commodity, so within the pillar of the commodities, right? Pillar 3, section 2C2F, which is the section that would give the CFTC jurisdiction over digital assets, explicitly excludes digital assets that have those 5 properties. So where does that leave Decred? It leaves it almost like in a circle, right? Because you have virtual currency is a digital asset. Oh, maybe like an incomplete triangle. A virtual currency is a digital asset. The CFTC will have jurisdiction over digital assets unless it has one of these 5 rights in a business entity. Decred, we call it a DAO, doesn't meet the statutory definition of a DAO because it hasn't been properly incorporated. And I guess maybe you're pointing out that, like, well, I guess kind of the point Phoenix just made is that maybe it actually was properly incorporated once upon a time, right? With the LLC that had control over the keys. And I actually don't think I mentioned that in the paper and kind of didn't appreciate that when I was writing it. So maybe that changes the analysis. But let's just stick with what I've actually written, which is that it's not a decentralized autonomous organization, but it does provide, like, arguably provides one of those 5 rights in something. We just don't know if that something is a business entity or not, because we don't know if Decred's a DAO or not. And so I guess it just, like, the point kind of becomes like, who is in charge of Decred then? Because there's not the SEC, it's not the CFTC, and it's not the IRS. So it seems like the logical response, in my opinion, is that a new agency is needed. Like, a new agency is needed that would be able to create very specific rules and regulations for how these things are to, be governed. And because I think it's silly, right? I think it's silly that people who voted in the Ooki DAO, whatever they voted on, probably like interest rates for lending and, borrowing or something like that, that agency is going to go after them and try to hold them liable for things that they really can't control, unless they have, more than 50% of the tokens. They have no control. I guess they can say, well, you want to know what? Then you're just not allowed to do this sort of thing. Like, just don't do that. And I think that that's going to be the only option for these regulators then, is to start telling people, well, you're just not allowed to do that. And I think that that's, like, very anti-innovation, very anti-American, very anti, free markets, very anti-democracy, very anti our economic interests, and so, yeah, I do believe that the true solution is probably, I mean, it's like, what's the problems of more with, or how do you solve big government? I know, more government, right? And, like,
Yeah.
I'm really not a big government type of person, just inherently. But I think that trying to give the SEC and the CFTC control over this thing that is new, that was created almost 100 years after, the inception of the SEC and the CFTC. I think I don't think it's helping anyone, is really what I think. And I think that Decred highlights the impracticality of what they're trying to do.
Speaking of regulations, I want to get to this one question by Dave. He says, you mentioned that you think some regulations might be attractive for institutions. How do you see that play out in a global market where each government tends to have their own agenda and rules?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it kind of gets back to kind of I guess, one of the closing remarks, if the government is listening to this, which is that you're going to drive away talent, right? You're going to drive away money. because there will be someone somewhere, some government ruler, whether it be El Salvador, Dubai, Singapore, someone will say, come here, like, we'll protect you. You can invest your money here. We'll create the right guidelines. So how do I see that play out in a global market where each government has their own agenda and rules? I think that, like, you'll see. And so this is actually, I was thinking about this today too. Like, man, I haven't talked to the Decred community in like 9-10 months. Like, what is my message going to be to everyone? And this is truly it. My message is to stay humble, continue to stack atoms. Don't talk about it if you don't have to. Like, us three, we're already kind of, it's too late, right? We're doxxed, we're well known. But I think that, as don't talk about it if you can. Like, if you can remain anonymous, if I could go back in time and not tell anyone that I have Decred, I think that would be a smart thing to do. And then
the contradiction there is we kind of need people talking about Decred as much as possible in order to market it. So I think some people are going to have to make that sacrifice.
100%.
So I'm comfortable making that sacrifice and be doxxed if it means awareness of Decred gets better. So
yes.
Don't tell people to go away.
That's how all three of us, I think, clearly feel, right? And I completely agree with that, Exodus. And the third thing, takeaway, would be, like, seriously try to figure out if you are in a position where you can orchestrate your life to not be subject to the rules of one government. So I don't care if that means, I have a driver's license in 2 states, or I have multiple passports. Like, I think that I'm obviously not there. I'm not anywhere close to that, but I would like to be in that position. And I think that's the message, truthfully, is that, like, I think it's scary. I think it's scary that, software developers living in Austin, Texas, might have the SEC knocking on their door tomorrow, telling them they're in violation of federal law. And they're probably just 24, 25-year-old, computer scientists trying to build something cool, probably don't have a whole bunch to go after. I think that's a lawsuit can really mess with someone's life too. It doesn't take, like, you don't have to be found guilty for it to completely disrupt your life, completely drain you of your resources, completely, create chaos in your life.
Yeah, no, I can.
That's why you should, as Brian Stafford says in the comments, fight the power, mix your Decred up, and buy some tickets. And don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone.
Don't tell anyone you did that, because by mixing your Decred, right? Like, now I might be at tornado sanction. I don't even know. I hadn't looked into the tornado cast sanction, but apparently you could be violating some, I don't even know, anti-money laundering laws. Like, I think it's scary that I mean, truthfully, I do think it's scary that I put myself out there. It's such a, like, not in, like, I think someone's going to come hurt me, but I think that, like, what if the DAO decides, oh, we're going to fund, so this would never happen, I'm sure of it. But what if the DAO voted to fund a terrorist organization, or heaven forbid, Putin's reelection, right? Like, that would never happen. We all know that. But if it did, like, as a holder of Decred, are we now responsible for those actions? Like, did I have how much of a voice did I have? If I voted a ticket, let's say I voted no, and let's say it passed, like, should I be responsible for funding Putin's reelection? I don't know. And I'm being super silly with that example, but I think the point is still there. And I don't want to be fear monger or anything like that. Like, I don't think I feel much more scared for software developers, because for someone like me, like, all right, he's making a little bit of money, he wants to invest it, fine. He's no harm. He's not doing anything. But I mean, if I was a builder and I was trying to, like, really build this technology that truly is subversive of state power and nation state power, like, probably scary to do that. And I commend all the people who are, because I think it's extremely important. I think it's extremely important that we, like, continue to fight for civil liberties in a digital era. especially with, cancel culture, people having deplatformed. And I mean, with Decred, we're all too familiar with the idea of shadow banning, right? Like, if we don't fight for our civil liberties in the digital space, in the digital era, like, they're not just going to be handed to us. And I think that technology such as Bitcoin, technologies such as Decred are paving the way and like leading that fight, because it starts with money. Like, all human coordination starts with money. And so that's why I'm still here. That's why I'll still be fighting the good fight. And yeah, I want to say to just the community as well, I love Decred. I was talking with Phoenix off screen, and after my last Decred in depth episode with JYP, my life just kind of got thrown into a little bit of tornado because of a lawsuit, right? Because of my custody dispute. And it's hard. Like, when those things happen, like, legal action can be extremely scary, and it drains you of your resources. It drains you of your time. It drains you of your mental energy. And I was just at a place in my life where it was like survival. I was like, had to stay afloat in school. I had to just be able to try to provide for my son. And it's like, I'm paying, $40,000, $50,000 a year to get this education. So it was something that I felt like I had to focus on. But my love for Decred has obviously never gone away. Hence why I do everything I can with my free time in my academic life to like study subjects that I think are going to be extremely relevant and pertinent to Decred and the Decred community. And I hope to one day come back if the stakeholders would have me. And because I feel that the stakeholders deserve your best, like, they deserve high quality. And I couldn't offer that at the time. And so I am extremely regretful and remorseful, selfishly, because I would love to have more Decred. But I have been just extremely thankful for the work that Exodus and Phoenix have continued to do for the community, because it's like, someone has to spread the word, right? We do need people talking about it. We need people who have a skin in the game in the next generation, right? Like, we need true academic, intellectual honesty and debate. And now, as we start building out DCRDEX and all these new pairs, we need to be inviting, and we need to be accepting of other communities, and not be hostile, right? Because Decred's actually kind of already won, in my opinion. Like, I feel like, because of the fact that we can say I can't, like, those words are extremely powerful. And what I think is about to happen over the next 10 years is we're going to find out who can't and who can. And when the regulators are saying, turn it off, like, that'll be the moment where we find out who can and who can't. So I think it's very exciting 10 years ahead of us. And I'm very excited to continue on this journey with all of you guys around the globe.
Well, it's I mean, one thing I just want to interject with, it's always good to have two sides of the debate. And I think your last few points there, going back a few minutes, is sometimes it's quite a sour pill to swallow, hearing, you could be facing with lawsuits, you could be facing this. And I think we do have to remind ourselves, yes, we can be anonymous, especially for myself and Exodus and yourself, where we do openly put ourselves out there. We do have to be aware of this, and I think it's a nice humble reminder. And I do like the idea that, we've got Brian in the comments as well, and I'll put some of those up in a second, just basically saying, what, we are trying to build this ultimate decentralized system. And although the worst things can happen to us, I think it's also important that we fight for what we believe in, and we do the things that we believe in. But yeah, I think it's a tough pill to swallow, just purely because it is, when you talk like that, it is so scary. It's like, yeah, I don't want to be faced with no lawsuit, but so you openly, if you're putting yourself out there like I am, you openly try and do everything the right way. But as these rules haven't even been built yet, that can be quite tough as well, can't it? So absolutely fantastic, Eduardo. We're kind of coming to the end of this, but I do want to kind of get some of these comments in. So if Exodus, if you just read out some comments that you think are appropriate.
Yeah, I just want to say first, I try to view things from an optimistic standpoint, not necessarily a pessimistic standpoint where it's like, oh, their government's going to come after us. I look at it as be optimistic. We're pioneering a new technology, and I wouldn't, try to have this like doomer view of it all, like, oh, like anyone who's involved with this, they're going to come after you. I think that's a little, over the top, but yeah, so I try to be optimistic, but yeah, I definitely want to get to some of these comments, some of these questions. We'll start with Buck says the popular conception of a DAO is muddied by so many crappy smart contract DAOs. Should we distance ourselves from the acronym? What do you guys think? I don't think we should, mainly because the DAO acronym is still being projected out there as, it's still a new thing, and yeah, it's getting muddied down. But it's like, what are we going to call ourselves? I believe at one point we used the term DAE, which stood for Decentralized Autonomous Entity, I believe. But at the same time, I don't know how much that would do. So I think we should still go by DAO. It's the new cool thing.
Yeah, you follow trend lines, don't you? And I think that's the trend at the moment. And I wish I could find this. I contacted Luke Powell a few months back to ask him because he deleted his Twitter account, but he actually did this amazing thread about what a DAO is. And and when you try and put your thoughts forward like that, like what Brian's just said there, is you think, in actual fact, you have to show everyone that it's important to be non-custodial, peer, permissionless, peer-to-peer, and a lot of these DAOs just aren't.
Yep. Yeah, and Brian also says our DAO is unruggable. It needs no regulation. So it's true.
Yeah.
Then Dave says the bit about attempts to coerce any given individual not having any actual effect is a reoccurring theme in Decred and is a testament to its design, in my opinion. So yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I completely agree with Exodus too, that I'm sorry if I sound alarming. I'm mostly doing it for hype factor, but like I don't think anyone needs to be scared. Like I'm still buying Decred. I'm still here. So I don't
you know way more about the subject than I do, but I'm just giving my opinion while you have facts on your side. So yeah.
No, this isn't there's no like debate about it. I think that I think I agree with what you said.
I'm an eternal optimist, but at the same point, when you are putting yourself out there like this, you have to show both sides. You have to say, actual fact, there is a dark side to this, and when I've read a few law books over the last few years, and whenever I finish one, I'm always like, God, yeah, the world's coming out to get me. But and it is important to say, actually, what we're doing here is pretty astounding. Actually, it's pretty amazing. Yeah. And like yourself, that's why I'm still here, really.
I don't think that any of these agencies have like any, the people who are there, they have families, they're humans, they're people. They don't want to ruin people's lives, right? I don't think like people would be like capricious or like evil in that sense. Yeah.
What's the next one then? Cool. We got loads today. Eduardo, you've got a stem of comments.
We got some more comments. Dave says, I'm sure those who have been around for a while have noticed various people try to bypass everything and hit a brick wall because it simply is not possible. Sheng Jun Sun says, with physical world interchangeability, regulation seems unavoidable. We have a comment in Russian, which I translated. Basically says, you guys ruined Decred mining. No, we didn't ruin Decred mining. That was a collective decision by the DAO.
We enhanced Decred mining.
That was me personally.
Yes.
that wasn't just one person. That was the collective of the DAO. So because you don't know what we voted on. Someone here could have voted no if they didn't like the change. But that was the collective decision. And then Buck says, a good time to remind everyone that you can connect your Decred full node over Tor, DCRDEX 2. Decred exists independent of the opinion of any political entity and always will. And shout out to the DEX devs. Recently we have the Litecoin markets going live, so you can trade Litecoin to Decred, Litecoin to Bitcoin, and Litecoin's been supported for some time, but now the server's up, so you can actually go in and do the trading. And I believe they're working on the Litecoin SPV internal wallet. So for now, you need to use Electrum and connect Electrum through this service. But really exciting to see that, and hopefully more Litecoin community members get on the DEX and start using it and start promoting it. And it'll be certainly exciting to see how the Zcash community accepts it, and the Bitcoin Cash and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I've asked. By the way, I hadn't told you this, but I've asked chap JC if he'll come on and talk a bit more about it, and maybe we can get Brian on as well to talk about what's been going on. That'd be absolutely amazing. Maybe we do a little demo for us.
Then once Ethereum goes live, definitely we can invite Brian back, or have Chap JC, or maybe have both.
Yeah,
I'd like to say one last thing, because some of those comments made me think. I believe, is my personal opinion, that some of the heroes of all of this, of civil liberties, truthfully, are the software developers, the people who are building the technology. Like Buck or whoever just commented about, Decred's kind of already future proof. But it's like, if we don't fight for those rights, if we don't fight for our right for peer-to-peer exchange, if we don't fight for our right for privacy, if we don't fight for our right, to not be censored and not be banned, and to, have due process of law before you have your assets just taken and frozen. Like, if we don't fight for these things, they will not be given to us. And so I say thank you to those developers out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I want to round this up, guys. We've gone an hour and a half. Thank you for everyone out there commenting, and like I say, we've had loads of comments this time. It's been absolutely amazing, and thank you, Eduardo, for your time. It's absolutely amazing. And I personally, and I know I speak for pretty much everyone in the community, I can't wait to see Decred in Depth back and flourishing again. I can't wait to see your interview.
Thank you.
So once you finish your law degree, it'd be great to have Eva back on and talk to you about how that all went and what you're up to again. But absolutely amazing. So before we sign off, Exus, is there anything you want to say?
No, I think I covered everything. Thanks a lot for Eduardo for coming on here and sharing so much information. Definitely a lot to digest. And I'm looking forward to going back and rewatching this and really making sense of everything, adding in some timestamps for everyone, because this is quite a long episode. But and thanks for Dave and Brian for showing up in the comments and watching. Two of the smartest people in Decred. So nice to
absolutely
see them around.
Yes.
Eduardo, the final word goes out to you.
Oh, truthfully, just thank you, like, to all my Decred friends out there, people who've been there, supported me, whether that be, just liking a comment or saying, hey, missed you, hope you're doing well. That's like the greatest part of being part of Decred, has been these relationships that I've built and will continue to build. So thank you.
Brilliant stuff. Yeah, thanks again, everyone. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Cheers.